Welcome back to On Texas Football. I'm Jeff Howe, joined by CJ Vogel. It's never too early to look at a way too early top 25. We'll look at a few of them and where Texas stands right now with the 2025 season in the rearview mirror as we all can turn the page and look ahead to 2026. This edition of On Texas Football is brought to you by Duck Camp. On Texas Football fam, just want to remind you, use the promo code ONTexas25. That's ONTexas25 at duckcamp.com to get 25% off of your order. CJ, let's go ahead and look at some of the way too early top 25 rankings that have come out. Everybody, if you're listening on audio, USA Today has Texas at number 1. ESPN, CBS Sports, Pro Football Focus, and Yahoo Sports have Texas at number 2. The Athletic has Texas at number 5, and then Fox Sports has Texas at number 6. CJ, given the roster instability in college football, this is an exercise that it's always fun to talk about. It's fun to look at. It's going to generate a lot of clicks and a lot of views for the outlets putting them together. I don't know how in the year 2026, given the roster instability in college football, you can even begin to put together a top 25 and what it may or may not look like. So maybe I'm asking you to take a shot in the dark. Of all of these rankings, which one do you think is the most likely outcome for where Texas will start the season?
Yeah, I like where the Athletic is at 5. I'd even say 4, right? 4 or 5 is where I think Texas starts the season. But like we saw going into 2025, you're going to get the Arch Manning bump. That's just reality, right? We joke about it, but there's, certainly substance to it. And I think, again, around the start of the season, you'll hear the hype and you'll hear everything that goes into, what the 2026 season could bring to the table. And a lot of that will be around Arch Manning going into his 4th year at Texas. But I think 4 or 5. And I think right now, Jeff, the big concern or big question mark with Texas is, will they have that offensive line? I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but you look around at every other position room for Texas at the moment, you feel pretty good, right? Quarterback, you feel great. Running back, you got 2 big-time weapons, a 5-star coming in. Mike Terry's going to factor in. Look, wide receiver, feel great. Tight end, you feel all right. Defensively, you feel really good about everything. But that one group that's preventing you from maybe jumping up to that 2 or 1 conversation, I think, is the unknown. And we'll get a clearer picture of that come the spring.
Yeah, one positive for 2026 that you can say over 2025. Regardless of where Texas starts, they'll be ranked in that position or maybe one position higher going into week 2 because they don't open with Ohio State this year. They do open with Texas State. Now, Texas State did have a winning record last year. They were a bowl team, but with all due respect to my Bobcat fans out there, Texas State is not Ohio State. So the Longhorns should start 1-0 before playing Ohio State. CJ, you mentioned the Arch bump, and with all due respect to everybody, the college football followers and media at large who may be sick of hearing about Arch Manning, I'll tell you that's just too bad because you're going to hear about Arch all offseason. CJ, the difference is now we've got a full season sample of Arch at quarterback, and that is why I feel if Texas does start in the top 3 in the preseason, even if they're preseason number 1, I tend to not think they'll be there. I think it's probably going to be Ohio State or maybe Indiana once their roster gets finalized. But even if Texas starts number 1, CJ, we've seen Arch go through. He basically went through what a lot of quarterbacks go through in a career. He went through in one season. Yeah, just a lot of emotional and psychological ups and downs. But the way he was peaking at the end of the year, it's not hype at this point with Arch. It's substance. Texas has a real life, legit quarterback.
It's reality now, right? Arch Manning lived up to the hype in the second half of the year. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but only 1 turnover the final 4 or 5 games, and that was against 3 top 10 opponents. So, yeah, I think he's battle-tested. I think, obviously, you go on the road to the swamp. You go to the horseshoe, right? You play in some big-time, troublesome games. You think about that game in Starkville, Jeff, having to claw and fight your way back to overtime after being down 17 in the 4th quarter and coming away with the win. That's something that we didn't know about Arch going into 2025. And obviously the early bumps, the bruises, the looks in the mirror of, hey, am I built for this? Am I, where I need to be in my development? I think right now we ended the 2025 season saying, hey, he was the best player on the field against Michigan. And I don't think it was relatively close, Jeff. If that's what Texas gets in 2026 with Arch, I know that's a big if. But if that's what you get, you're talking about one of the better players in all of college football.
Where are you at on culture? Because that's was a big thing for me throughout the season. And you can say, well, that team last year, they didn't handle being preseason number one all that well. CJ, I just think with the inexperience, it wasn't a lack of talent. It wasn't a issue with youth. I think it was just inexperience being in that position. But I would argue that I think the culture is really good because most teams that get into the position Texas got into, they probably they don't probably put themselves back in the CFP discussion by the time you get to November. And I am feeling better about the culture because we talked about the losses going from 24 to 25 when you lose a Jahdae Barron and, all the leadership you lost. But to bring back Arch and Trevor Gooseby and Colin Simmons and Jelani McDonald, CJ, I feel like this leadership core is strong enough to where the guys coming in, even though you are bringing in some really talented guys, and this is the biggest roster overhaul Sark has done, I feel like you've got enough really strong personalities in the leadership department to feel like your culture is going to be able to allow you to handle the really high expectations right out of the gate.
That's going to be really interesting to me because, look, since Sark has got here, what's he talked about, right? It's figuring out the offensive line, going from 9 scholarship guys up to 15 and 16, and the culture. And, we're looking at this culture as kind of, a common theme throughout the years. And Jeff, I left the Citrus Bowl wondering what that culture might look like. And then after the portal window, you had 23 guys depart, with a lot of those guys racking up starts, and more than half of them seeing more than 10 career games for Texas. And a lot of those guys factored into being contributors or key contributors in 2026. So for me, the guys that you mentioned, I'll even throw in Ty Anthony Smith, because Sark mentioning in the bowl game media availabilities that he was the leader in that linebacking room towards the back half of the year. That's significant to me. But you're bringing in a lot of freshmen, and you're bringing in more high-impact contributors out of the portal than ever before as well. How quickly do they get acclimated in winter conditioning and spring football? That's going to be key. Because right now, I don't think what that locker room or culture will be like for 2026. There's just too much turnover. But if those guys that you just mentioned, the Goosebys, the Mannings, the Simmonses, the Smiths, Hero Canoe is a big one. If they can command that locker room to what the expectation is and has been at Texas, then, hey, I think you're in a really good spot.
And I hope so, because that's a fair point you made. I hope that's the case because those guys are your best players. They're in the best position to lead. They're talented enough to lead, and you hope they take that mantle. Let's thank our sponsor really quick for this edition of On Texas Football. That's our friends over at Duck Camp. Duck Camp makes gear for folks who live for being out there, whether that's in a duck blind at sunrise or on the 40 acres for a Saturday kickoff. Born right here in Austin, Duck Camp builds best-in-class hunting and fishing apparel that works just as well for a full day in the field as it does for a long day of tailgating. From sun protection shirts that keep you cool during those early season scorchers to their iconic game series hats that feel like instant classics, Duck Camp gear is ready for football season, hunting season, and every season in between. Get out there, stay out there, and hook up. Shop Duck Camp at duckcamp.com. And On Texas Football fam, don't forget, use the promo code ONTexas25 for 25% off of your order at duckcamp.com. CJ, we'll wind this down with me asking you a question. Is the Ohio State game a must-win game for this program and for Sark? And the reason why I ask that is, looking back, and granted, the final AP poll, if Texas would have been ranked ahead of Texas A&M and been in the top 10, I don't think anybody would have batted an eye. But the fact that, you look at Texas finishing at 12, some people say, okay, that's probably right about where you should be for a disappointing season like 2025 was. But you look at that poll, CJ, and the wins Texas had, A&M finishes 8th, Oklahoma finishes 13th, Vanderbilt finishes 15th, and Michigan was in the 20s. So that's 4 top 25 wins. And then you look at the losses, it was 6th ranked Georgia, 5th ranked Ohio State. I just feel like, CJ, and again, this goes back to moving on from PK and hiring Will Muschamp and why you go all in the portal and you bring in a Cam Coleman, and you could have brought Trey Wisner back, but you moved on from him and you're bringing in Raleek Brown and Hollywood Smothers to revive your run game. I think you do that because you've gotten it to a point, and the next step for Texas, I think, you have to beat the Ohio States and the Georgias and those highly ranked teams that are on your schedule, CJ. So it sounds crazy, and it doesn't impact your ability. It won't keep you get you to an SEC championship game. It won't keep you from getting to Atlanta if you lose. I do feel like the Ohio State game is about as must win of a non-conference game as Sark has had since he's been here.
I think it's crazy to say on January 21st we're calling, a game in the non-conference must win, but I totally agree with you. And it's, again, if you want to get to that upper echelon, right? And Texas has, I don't want to say plateaued, but they hit that wall of a top 3 or 4 team, right? Haven't quite gotten over the hump to play for a national championship yet. But for Sark specifically, you've not yet beat a Kalen DeBoer, you haven't beat a Kirby Smart, you haven't beat a Ryan Day. Well, you're going into this game at home against Ohio State with a 4th-year quarterback and a roster overhaul that you believe is going to, put yourself in the conversation to be a top 5 team in the country. If that's not a game that you cannot win, I don't know, Jeff, right? That's a tough conversation to have. And we just saw Penn State move on from their head coach after years and years of having successful seasons, but not getting over the hump against the teams that they needed to do so. So I'm not calling for that, but when you say, hey, you beat Texas A&M, you beat Oklahoma, you beat Vanderbilt, that's great. You already believed over the last 4 or 5 years that your program's on a higher trajectory and floor than them to begin with, right? So you want to punch up, always want to. So Ohio State week 2, that has to be a must win. And again, I know that's crazy. It doesn't impact your ultimate ability to make the playoff, but for me, I'm right there with you thinking this is a game that Texas has to come away victorious in.
And I'll be honest, CJ, not just because it's the first marquee game on the schedule, but I go back to how we started this. I've got a pretty decent idea of what Ohio State's bringing back. It's much easier right now for me to look at that Ohio State game and try to predict what's going to happen than looking at the game against Ole Miss or LSU or Tennessee, which some of these conference opponents, CJ, I have no idea right now what some of these rosters are going to look like, except for maybe the 2 rivals. We probably have a clearer idea of Oklahoma and Texas A&M, but even then, it's not very clear. So it is an exercise that might be futile to try to put together a way too early top 25, but clearly that Ohio State game looms massive for Texas and Sark and Arch Manning as we put 2025 behind us and start looking ahead to 2026. CJ, thank you for the knowledge and expertise as always. Thank you to Matthew behind the scenes for producing it. Thank you to Duck Camp for sponsoring it. If you're not a member over at ontexasfootball.com, you still have time to take advantage of our Portal Madness special, but don't wait too much longer. This offer is not going to last forever. First-time subscribers to ontexasfootball.com get your first month of access for just $1. Again, not going to last too much longer, so if you've been thinking about it, do not wait. First-time subscribers to ontexasfootball.com, your first month of access is only $1. For CJ, for Matthew, for the entire On Texas Football staff, I'm Jeff Howe. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and until next time, hook 'em.